As you may very well know, Arry and Bert work at the Sodor ironworks and have been doing so for many years. But it has not always been this way. Two other engines slaved over the scorching machines for decades, until their time finally ran out. This story will tell you what happened. Sodor is an idealistic place with lush countrysides and bustling cities. Engines whoosh through tunnels and buses whir under bridges all day long. However, not all of Sodor is this pleasant wonderland. The Sodor ironworks is gloomy, disorientating and extremely depressing. Any engine that goes near it shudders with horror, knowing that the smoke being blown out of the chimneys could be the remains of an engine they once knew. Only two engines don't mind this setting, Bonnie and Clyde. The pair were originally tank engines that worked for the Wellsworth and Sudbury Railway, but Bonnie got a rebuild to gain a tender. They both shared the same dark grey livery, which was crusted with rust and soot. They never got washdowns or repaints. Their lining was peeling, and Bonnie's tender was scratched all over. They revelled in the misery of any approaching engine, not missing the chance to taunt them.
"You'll be next,"
Clyde would sadistically cackle.
"There's a pile of slag with your name on it."
While Clyde was more upfront for the taunting, Bonnie was much more subtle. She would sneak around the scrapyard and wail through rusted pipes. No engine would stand up to them, until Edward did.
"You two need to cut it out!"
He shouted at them one evening.
Oh, what? You're gonna give us a little bump?
Bonnie smirked. Her dark eyes were not assisted in the scarlet glow of the smelting shed.
Humph. We've been through worse than that, ain't we, Clyde?
"Sure we have.
Clyde wheezed.
We survived that fire at the works."
Your brother didn't.
The blue engine blankly replied, unmoved. Clyde scoffed.
Buck was weak. We were strong. It's simple, Ed.
Don't call me that! Only my friends call me that! You two are far from it!
Edward began to grow slightly annoyed.
Oh, don't you like that, Ed?
The other tender engine giggled.
Sorry, Ed.
Edward blew out a little bit of steam and took a deep breath.
You're not invincible, you know.
Sure we are.
Bonnie's eyes swirled like a carousel.
We manage many things.
Her accent made such an innocent suggestion seem outright terrifying.
She only speaks the truth.
Clyde butted in before Edward could say anything.
We'll work on for decades more. This place has promised to keep us around until something better comes along, which we know will never happen.
Edward stared at the two with a concerned and knowing look. His face was reminiscent of a dismissive engine.
You two really think you're the best around, don't you?
We don't think it. We know it!
Clyde's grin was growing, but it wasn't a cheerful grin. It was rather menacing.
All right then, I'll leave you to that. But I will say one more thing. Time keeps ticking. It doesn't wait for anyone.
And with that, Edward disappeared into the night, leaving the two naive scrappers commenting about him. Over the next few weeks, Bonnie and Clyde continued their torments. They didn't care about what Edward thought. He was just an old fusspot who knew nothing. They both noticed many changes around the ironworks. Firstly, the sheds were upgraded with an odd pump next to it. Then the scrapping claw was replaced with a brand new model. And then the coal chutes were moved onto the outgoing line. Clyde shrugged it off, but Bonnie couldn't. One foggy winter evening, the two engines were warming themselves up in the smelting shed by watching the newly installed claw tear an old truck apart. The pair were rather content with this, although one thing was bugging Bonnie.
Clyde?
She asked, with a slight grimace.
Yeah?
The tank engine replied, fixated on the claw.
Does it not strike you as
She paused.
odd that manager is suddenly overhauling everything?
Not really. Why?
Clyde replied, concerned.
I just keep thinking. He replaced the claw and the sheds. What if he replaces us?
Silence fell between the engines. Clyde looked away dismissively.
No, he wouldn't. He said that he would only replace us if...
He found something better than us.
Bonnie finished the sentence. They both grew concerned.
We'll be scrapped.
The tank engine stared into her soul. For the first time, he seemed rather scared.
I won't let that happen to you, sugar.
We won't get a choice.
Bonnie snapped.
We'll be shoved into the smelting pit.
No, we won't!
Clyde shouted back, making her jump a little. Bonnie looked away.
Fine. Let's just go to sleep.
She huffed blankly.
We'll bring it up with him tomorrow.
She slid away into the fog, beckoning Clyde to follow her. The next morning, the two engines were awoken by a shout from their manager. He never shouted to wake them up, unless it was for something important.
Bonnie, Clyde,
The manager began.
I have some news.
Clyde yawned.
Don't keep us in suspense.
He sarcastically remarked.
Well, I have just struck a deal with the other railway.
Bonnie's eyes widened. Clyde's went narrow.
Elaborate on deal.
He raised an eyebrow.
I have come into possession of two of their newest shunters. You two have been sufficient for the longest time, but I feel like it's time to part ways.
The two engines stared at him, horrified.
You can't!
Bonnie spluttered.
It was lovely to work with you, but I found some engines that are more efficient. You two have been good, I will admit. However, it's time to say goodbye. I'll try to see you before you know.
With a slight frown, the manager walked away, and he was soon gone. Bonnie stared at Clyde, frozen in horror.
What?
She began to cough.
What do we...
Shh!
Clyde began to hush her.
We'll get out of here.
How? We've survived all the time. Manager will know if we just sneak away.
We'll wait until tonight, until the shunters arrive. If they begin work, we can go on the run. Imagine the countryside we could go through, the rivers we could cross.
Now that's what you call a dream.
Bonnie stared at one of the chimneys, still smoking. All throughout the day, Bonnie and Clyde ran through their plan. It was foolproof. They did their work at their usual pace, slinking through the sharp corners of the ironworks. However, there was a distinct lack of tormenting, which confused the usual engines, including Edward. They just ignored his questions. As night fell over the island, and the engines had finished up their work, it was time to put the plan into action. They decided to have one last look around their home before they left, just for the memories. While they would have wanted a break, this isn't how it should have happened. But what's done is done, and it was time to leave. They began to puff quickly away from the smelting shed, picking up speed as they went. Bonnie behind, Clyde in front. It was going well, until, out of nowhere, there was the loudest noise they had never heard before. A horn. The sound became a very fast purr nearby.
that?
Bonnie whimpered, quite frightened.
I don't know.
Clyde didn't even get to finish his reply. A green diesel suddenly appeared from the shadows and dragged him away with a hiss from his fire. Bonnie just screamed. She switched lines and continued away from the scrapyard. Her whistle refused to blow and her pistons kept pumping. She couldn't stop. She sped onto the trestle bridge, the only thing separating her from the outside world. She went as fast as she could and spotted another green diesel on the line. She braked hard, causing sparks to fly around her. Bonnie stared at the engine. He was rough, beaten, and bearded. His eyelids were shallow, and his nose pointed.
You must be...
She trailed off out of sheer terror. The diesel grew a heartless grin, shaking Bonnie to her core.
You've got a nice pile of slag with your name on it, sweetheart.
The diesel watched Bonnie begin to back up. But he was quicker. He began to push her back to the ironworks for one final time. Bonnie and Clyde were sat in sidings together until it was time to finally melt them down. While they thought that they were invincible, they were the very opposite. Vulnerable. Yes, everyone has their prime, but time keeps ticking, and it waits for no one.